Does your pile of wood keep toppling over? There may be something you can do about it. Let's find out in today's video. So in today's video, we're going to talk about stacks of firewood and why they end up toppling over. There's a few main reasons, and we're also going to discuss what you can do to fix it. So if you look behind me, we got this pile of mostly red and white oak, and there's a pretty good bubble or bulge in the middle here. It's going to end up toppling over. I'm going to move it over to the woodshed. We're actually in my old wood yard, which I've pretty much discontinued. I got a few logs and firewood here and there, but I'm transitioning to eventually have everything over to my new wood yard. If you haven't seen the new wood yard, please check out some of my other videos. I actually have a whole playlist of making the mill yard area and the firewood area. So the firewood stack can look nice and perfectly square, straight, beautiful when you go to stack it. Over time, over the course of a year, 2 years, things can shift, move, and ends up toppling eventually, oftentimes, and we're going to get into right now. So the first reason is going to be you're stacking your wood too high. Now, you can do what you want. I'm speaking from personal experience, doing firewood for many, many years. If you go over about, I'm going to say 5 feet in height, you have a much, much greater chance of your stack tipping over. The reason for that, gravity. You could have a slight lean. It might look level, but you could be off just a little bit, maybe 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch per foot. But the higher you go, the more exaggerated that lean gets. And you end up with something like the Leaning Tower of Pisa where it tips over. Or if you'd stayed to 4 feet, let's say, it's a much less chance of it tipping over. So the first reason your wood might be tipping over is that you're stacking it too high. So another reason your wood might be tipping over is it's not a good base. Just like a house, you need a good foundation to have a good structure. If you put all this wood, you could have 10, 15,000 pounds, 20,000 pounds of firewood sitting on the base. So depending on how you make it, that could affect the whole thing. Just to give you a couple of examples, if you put your wood on wood pallets, guess what? Wood pallets often rot. Oftentimes wood pallets are softwood. Even if they're oak, over the course of a year or two, all that ground moisture comes up, all the water from the wood is going down into the pallets, and they're gonna rot out. Once they rot out, the pile starts shifting and moving. So if you are going to use wood pallets, I would at least recommend putting them on a good base. That could be stone, that could be gravel, something that's going to drain fairly decently and is going to be firm. I would not put them on just regular dirt or loam or something like that. So therefore, if I was you, I would use plastic pallets. If you're going to stack open stacks, plastic pallets aren't going to rot out. They're going to be less likely to shift over time like the wood is, and in my opinion, they're just a better choice. So another reason that your wood might be shifting is going to be that you're not top covering your wood. I want to be crystal clear on this. When I say top cover, that means just the top of the wood's covered. You're leaving the sides open so that the sun and wind can hit the wood and still season it. But you're preventing all the rain and snow from getting into the wood, which is a big reason why a lot of people's wood stacks crumble. Let's say you get a foot of snow, all that snow is melting. Not only do you have extra weight on top of the wood, pushing down, but all that water from the snow and the rain is getting down into the wood. It could freeze, and then the ice pushes the wood apart, and guess what? Your stack topples over. You're going to see advocates for both top covering and leaving stacks uncovered. I think there's advantages and disadvantages to both. I'm not going to get into those in today's video. I like top covering for the reasons I just stated, but there are people that don't cover their wood at all and they have great success. But I would say in my experiences, covering it in the top leads to less topples than leaving them open. Another reason that your wood might be taking a tumble is you're not being careful when you stack the ends. This is called cribbed ends. You're basically just putting the wood crisscross opposite of each other, and you're building a strong bookend that can hold the regular stack in place. Obviously, you can't just stack the wood regularly to the end because you end up with an angle. If you try to, it's just going to keep tumbling over. So you're going to have either something to hold the end, maybe like a pallet with some braces, or you can do cribbed ends like I did here. But you want to save your nice, big, heavy, square pieces of split wood for the ends. That's what I would recommend. If you start using round, full pieces of wood that weren't really split, you're going to end up with more likelihood that the ends are going to move around and tumble. So taking extra time in your ends of your stacks is going to save you a lot of aggravation down the road. So another reason that your wood might be toppling over is something you really can't control, and that's that wood settles. as the wood seasons and dries, it's going to shift and move and actually settle quite a bit. You might be surprised if you measure the height of your stack when it's freshly stacked and come back 2 years later and measure it, you could lose several inches of height, which obviously if the wood underneath is also moving around, settling, things start shifting, moving, and there's really not a whole lot that you can do about that other than try to make sure when you stack it originally, you keep the wood as level and straight and plumb as possible. So the last reason your wood's tumbling over might hit close to home. I know for me it wasn't easy to accept, but you might have to accept you're just not that good of a stacker, or you don't have the patience to be a good stacker. Let's discuss what I mean. Some people are just naturally gifted. They're artisans with the wood. They have their wood perfectly together, like a tight-fitting puzzle. You could hardly slide a credit card in between the cracks, in between the wood, and it just looks beautiful when they're done. But I will say this, those people usually either spend a lot of time stacking the wood and get the pieces just right. They might go through 20 pieces of wood before they get the right one for that piece. It's kind of like a stonemason building a chimney or something. Or they might get really uniform wood from their guy or girl that sells them wood. Maybe they're buying wood from a processor and they have a box wedge and they have all nice square pieces. So for a lot of people, that just isn't going to be the case. Maybe you don't want to spend that kind of time. Maybe you don't have nice uniform pieces. I know for me, I get all kinds. I split my own wood. I get squares, rectangles, triangles. I get full pieces of wood. You're just not going to get the perfect sizes for every piece, and I don't want to spend 5 times longer than I normally do to split the wood. So I would put myself somewhere in the middle. I'm not an artisan wood stacker, but I'm also not a real sloppy stacker. I'd say I'm somewhere in between. I would say my piles tend to look a lot better when they're stacked versus 2 years later when I might go to actually use the wood because of reasons I discussed earlier in the video of the piles shifting, moving, and just sagging, settling, etc., etc. So what can you do to correct it? Well, if you start noticing your wood has a lean to it, you can kind of correct it by stacking the next piece of wood the opposite way, so your big end is where your small end was. And over the course of a row, 2 rows, 3 rows, you might end up correcting it and getting back to level, and then you can continue on upwards. Because if you don't do that, you think about it, if you have a bunch of rows on top of wood that's leaning and you keep leaning, you have hundreds of pounds pushing down, maybe thousands of pounds, and it's going to end up toppling, and it's no real surprise that it just doesn't work at the end of the day. So I'm going to finish out the video by saying this. I don't recommend open stacks. Although they are a cheap and easy way to stack your wood, and it might be tempting to do that, for the reasons I mentioned in today's video, I just don't recommend using that method to stack your wood. I think it's better than some methods like throwing all your wood in a loose pile in the ground, but I think there's also a lot better options like a woodshed. Yeah, it's going to cost you a little money and time to build it, but once you have it built, you have a good place to stack your wood for every future year that you burn, and you have a much less chance of the wood tipping over. I can tell you from first-hand experience, doing open stacks for many years and using the woodshed for many years, I can stack the wood much higher in the woodshed and not have to worry about it tipping over. I don't think I've ever had a tip over, knock on wood, in the woodshed, whereas I've had multiple tip overs on open stacks. This has a pretty solid floor, so I don't have to worry about settling. I don't have to worry about stuff coming down from the sky as far as rain or snow getting on the wood and kind of pushing it apart when it thaws and freezes. And I also have something solid to stack the first row against, so I know it's level and it's not going to tip, at least that way. And once you put a couple more rows in there, everything kind of locks together nice. And like I said, once I started using a woodshed regularly, I haven't had any tip over issues, even though I'm stacking 1 to 2 feet higher than I ever stacked in open stacks. So I hope you got something out of today's video. I hope you found it both informative and maybe a little fun. I know it's not a super fun topic, but I think it's good to know if you're going to burn wood. And let me know in the comments what you thought. See you next time.